The sunlight spilled across my marble kitchen counter, catching the edge of my coffee cup in a warm, golden glow. I was halfway through my morning routine, silk blouse buttoned, hair swept into a low chignon, the city skyline winking back at me through the floor-to-ceiling windows, when my phone buzzed. The notification was from my sister. Just one short message. "Hey, I think it's better if you don't come to Dad's birthday this weekend. It's complicated. Complicated." That's the word they always used when they didn't want to say the truth out loud. I set the phone down gently, like it was made of glass. Took a slow sip of coffee. Outside, the early morning traffic hummed, oblivious to the small earthquake that had just rolled through my chest. I felt that old sting, the one I thought I'd outgrown, the ache of being shut out. But this time, it didn't knock me down. My eyes drifted to the leather folder on my dining table. Inside it were the final purchase documents, crisp, official, life-changing. The ink was barely dry. They didn't know. They couldn't know. That complicated birthday? It was booked at my resort. The one I'd just bought, quietly, without a single word to them. I leaned back in my chair, let the corner of my mouth curl into the smallest, most private smile. This was going to be interesting. 5 years ago, I was standing in the narrow hallway of my childhood home, clutching my overnight bag like it was some kind of shield. The air was thick with tension, the kind that doesn't just fill a room, it seeps into your bones. Dad sat in his armchair, silent, staring at the TV that wasn't even on. My sister leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, her eyes sharp but tired. Mom was pacing, voice raised just enough to sound more like disappointment than concern. "You can't just drift around like this," she said, waving her hands like she could physically rearrange my life. "No stable job, no real plan. You're 25, for God's sake." I remember my throat tightening, my hands trembling just enough for me to hide them in my sleeves. "I do have a plan," I said, though my voice cracked halfway through. "It just doesn't look like yours." That's when my sister laughed, short, sharp, the kind of sound that cuts deeper than words. "Face it, you've always been the one we have to pick up after. Maybe it's time you stop pretending you're more than you are. More than I was." The words hit like cold water. I looked at Dad, hoping for something, a flicker of belief, a scrap of encouragement, but he didn't meet my eyes. So I turned to leave, because staying would have meant breaking. At the door, I felt a soft hand on mine. It was Grandma. She'd been sitting quietly in the corner, wrapped in her knitted shawl. She pressed something into my palm, her old silver keychain, shaped like a tiny compass. "You'll find your way," she whispered. "And when you do, you'll never need their directions again." I walked out that night with just that compass, a few $100s, and a head full of questions. I didn't know exactly where I was going. But I knew one thing for certain. I would never beg for a place in their lives again. And so, I left, my shadows stretching long under the streetlights, my heart pounding with equal parts fear and determination. Leaving home was like stepping off a cliff without knowing if there was ground beneath me. My first apartment was a shoebox above a noisy laundromat, with peeling wallpaper and a bathroom door that didn't quite close. I slept on a thrift store mattress on the floor, ate instant noodles, and counted coins before buying groceries. At first, the world felt like it was daring me to fail. Job interviews ended with polite smiles and, "We'll be in touch." Freelance gigs paid barely enough to cover rent. Some nights I sat on that mattress with Grandma's silver compass in my hand, wondering if I'd made a mistake. Then I met her. Elena Marquez, a woman with perfectly cut suits, a reputation for turning small ideas into empires, and a laugh that made you believe she knew things the rest of the world hadn't figured out yet. We met at a networking event I almost didn't attend. I'd been offered a last-minute spot designing a small brochure for a startup, and Elena happened to see my work. She pulled me aside, asked about my background, and listened, really listened, without that faint edge of judgment I'd grown used to. "You have talent," she said matter-of-factly, "but you're thinking too small. Work with me, and I'll teach you how to make big moves." From that day, my life became a blur of early mornings, late nights, and endless learning. Elena was demanding but fair. She taught me how to negotiate deals, read contracts, and spot opportunities where others only saw risk. The first year was brutal. I worked 3 side jobs to keep afloat, all while shadowing her at client meetings. My friends posted vacation pictures while I was hunched over my laptop at 2 a.m., eyes stinging from screen light. There were nights I cried quietly into my pillow, questioning if the grind was worth it. But then the wins started coming. A local boutique agreed to let me rebrand their entire image. Sales doubled in 3 months. A mid-tier resort hired me to overhaul their marketing, and their bookings shot up so dramatically that industry magazines took notice. Each success built on the last. My savings grew, my reputation solidified, and slowly, doors opened that I hadn't even known existed. By the 4th year, I wasn't just taking jobs, I was choosing them. By the 5th, I'd started investing, first in small properties, then in bigger ones. Elena's voice echoed in my head the day I signed my first 6-figure deal. Don't just make money. Make ownership your habit. And I did. Quietly, strategically, without ever posting more than the occasional neutral photo online, a cup of coffee, a city skyline, a vague caption. My family still thought I was doing some design work and getting by. They didn't know I'd built a portfolio of luxury properties. They didn't know my latest acquisition, finalized just a week ago, was the very resort they had booked for Dad's birthday. I had kept my silence for years, but that was about to change. I arrived at the resort 2 days before the party, not as a guest, but as the owner. The drive through the palm-lined entrance felt different now. The guards at the gate recognized me immediately, nodding with respect. The valet hurried to open my door, addressing me as ma'am, in the tone reserved for someone who signs paychecks. Stepping into the grand lobby, I let myself breathe in the scent of fresh orchids and sea salt drifting through the open glass doors. The marble floors gleamed under the soft amber lighting, and in the distance, the ocean stretched out like a sheet of blue silk. I toured the property like I always did after an acquisition, not as a stranger, but as someone memorizing every detail. The infinity pool shimmered under the sun. The private villas were adorned with crisp white linens and hand-woven throws. Each feature, each corner, was mine now. And then, I saw them. My family was in the main lounge, surrounded by luggage and chatter. My sister was talking to the concierge, explaining some special arrangements for the party. Dad sat nearby, looking content, wearing a crisp button-down shirt. I stayed out of sight for a moment, just watching. It felt almost surreal. They were preparing for a celebration in my house, without knowing it. I decided to make my entrance. I walked toward the lounge, heels clicking against the marble. The concierge saw me first, straightening instantly. "Good afternoon, Ms. Rivera," he greeted warmly. "Everything is prepared exactly as you requested." The words hung in the air like smoke. My sister turned slowly, her polite smile faltering. "Ms. Rivera," she repeated, confusion knitting her brows. Dad looked at me then, really looked, and I saw the shift in his expression. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice careful. I let the pause stretch. "Checking on my property," I said simply, my gaze sweeping the lounge. "Making sure everything's ready for the weekend." "Your property?" My sister's voice was almost a whisper. I nodded toward the concierge. "Yes. I bought the resort last week." The ink's barely dry. Silence. Complete, heavy silence. The kind where you can almost hear the sound of their thoughts scrambling for balance. My sister's jaw dropped slightly. Dad's hands froze on his coffee cup, and even the bellboy passing by slowed, sensing the tension. I could have drawn it out, but I kept my tone even, calm, the way Elena taught me. "I understand there's a birthday celebration planned here. Don't worry, the booking stands." My sister blinked. You own this place?" "Since when?" "Since it became available," I said, shrugging lightly. I'd been looking to expand my portfolio, and this resort fit perfectly.
"Funny, isn't it?
The one you uninvited me from, turns out it's mine." The shame on her face was almost tangible. Dad looked down at the table, his fingers tightening around his cup. I let the moment breathe, not to gloat, but to let reality settle in. The air between us was a cocktail of shock, discomfort, and something else, respect. Finally, Dad cleared his throat. "Why didn't you say anything?" I tilted my head, offering a faint smile. "Because I didn't need your validation to get here. And honestly, I wanted my work to speak for itself." The truth hung there, soft but sharp. I could see them absorbing it, each word pressing against the walls of whatever picture they'd painted of me all these years. The resort was mine. The success was mine. And for the first time, they were standing in my world, on my terms. I could have walked away right then, left them to piece together their dignity over champagne and birthday cake. But instead, I chose to stay. Not for revenge, but for clarity. We moved to a quieter corner of the lounge, away from the other guests. Dad's eyes followed me, cautious. My sister kept fidgeting with the strap of her handbag. "I'll let the celebration go ahead," I began, folding my hands neatly on the table. "But there are conditions." Dad raised an eyebrow. "Conditions?" "Yes," I said evenly. "Because this isn't about money, and it's not about rooms or menus. It's about respect." My sister opened her mouth, then closed it again. "Condition 1, I continued. "If you want me in your lives, you treat me as I am. Not as the girl who left with nothing, but as the woman I've become. That means no undermining, no passive-aggressive comments, no comparing me to anyone else." My voice stayed calm, but my words landed with weight. "Condition 2, I said, turning to my sister. "You stop speaking for me. I don't need you deciding what's better for me, or whether I belong at family events. If there's an issue, you come to me directly." Her cheeks flushed, and she nodded once, almost imperceptibly. "Condition 3, I added, looking at Dad. "We start over. But on equal footing. I'm not asking for apologies to erase the past. I'm asking for accountability so we can move forward without repeating it." Dad held my gaze for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Fair enough." I leaned back slightly, letting my tone soften. "I'm not shutting you out. I'm just done chasing a place at the table. If we're going to share one, it's going to be built on mutual respect." The silence that followed was different from the earlier one. This was quieter, heavier, but in a way that felt possible. Like something was shifting. My sister finally spoke, her voice small. "You really did all this by yourself?" I smiled faintly. "Not by myself. I had mentors, and I worked harder than I thought I could. But I didn't have you cheering me on. And maybe that made me stronger." Dad looked away, his jaw tightening. "I underestimated you. I didn't rush to fill the space after that. Some truths need room to breathe." Finally, I stood. "Your rooms are ready. Enjoy the party. I'll join you tomorrow night for dinner, and we'll see if we can make this a new chapter." They both nodded, still processing. I could see the wheels turning in their heads, the slow, uneasy recognition of the power shift. This wasn't about me winning and them losing. This was about setting the balance right. And for the first time in years, it felt like that might actually be possible. The next evening, I arrived at the resort's private dining terrace just as the sun dipped low over the horizon. The sky was painted in streaks of coral and gold, the ocean catching the light like liquid fire. My family was already seated. Dad looked up when I walked in, and for the first time in a long time, his smile didn't feel guarded. My sister stood, a little hesitant, and pulled out the chair beside her. Dinner began quietly, but not uncomfortably. Between bites of grilled sea bass and sips of chilled wine, I noticed the difference. Fewer clipped remarks, more listening. Dad asked about my work, and when I spoke, he didn't interrupt. My sister complimented the resort, and I could tell it wasn't just because it was mine. At one point, Dad reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Inside was Grandma's silver compass. "I think this belongs to you," he said. I smiled softly, fingers curling around the familiar weight. "It's been with me the whole time," I told him, slipping it back into my purse. "But thank you for remembering." We didn't talk about the night I left. We didn't rehash old arguments. Instead, we let the present be what it was, tentative, fragile, but real. Later, as the candles burned low and the waves whispered against the shore, I excused myself and stepped onto the terrace balcony. The air was warm, the scent of salt and jasmine mingling as I looked out over the property. This place had once been just a contract, another calculated investment. Now it was something more, the backdrop to a moment I never thought I'd have. I thought about the girl who had walked out of her family's house with nothing but a compass and a stubborn sense of self. She would have never imagined standing here, not just owning the table, but choosing who sat at it. From behind me, I heard Dad's voice. "We'll do better this time." I turned, gave a small nod, and let the corners of my lips lift. "So will I." As I walked back to join them, I slipped the compass into my pocket, its cool metal pressing against my palm. A reminder that no matter how far I'd come, I had always been finding my way. Sometimes the sweetest victories aren't loud. They're quiet moments where you sit in the place they never thought you'd reach and realize you've been there all along.